Hi, my name is Sarah Grant. I'm 24 years old, and what you're about to hear is my real story. When I was just 14, my family threw me out of my own home. They said I was unstable. But the truth? They were hiding something much darker. My sister died mysteriously. My birth records were sealed. They erased me, my identity, even tried to fake a suicide. But now I'm back and I have everything. The tapes, the evidence, the truth. They destroyed my past. Now I'm about to destroy their legacy. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video because some truths are too powerful to stay buried. She hadn't planned to return. Not to the house on Hollow Crest Drive. Not to the city that watched her fall apart at 14, and definitely not to the people who stared at her with crocodile smiles and secrets under their nails. But when Sarah Whitmore stepped off the bus wearing a coat 2 sizes too big and carrying nothing but a leather notebook with a broken spine, she didn't come for forgiveness or closure. She came for proof that her sister's death wasn't an accident, that her own exile wasn't a misunderstanding, and that every warm hug she was given as a child was a lie wrapped in perfume and pearls. The memories hit her before the cold did. How she once hid in the crawl space behind the kitchen when her stepmother shouted that girls like her only brought shame. How her father barely flinched when she cried at her sister's funeral. And how the town whispered that she'd been sent away for mental help when in truth, she had simply seen something she wasn't supposed to. Her sister Emily, bleeding from the nose, whispering, "They made me lie. Sarah, don't believe the will." And then the next day, she was gone, a so-called overdose, a fast funeral, and a silence that lasted 10 years until a letter arrived from a name she hadn't heard since. Clemens and Raleigh, probate and estate division. And inside was a single sentence. You were named as a silent beneficiary by Emily Whitmore. Contact required. And so here she was, standing outside the old house, now repainted and remodeled, but still humming with ghosts only she could hear. The front door opened before she knocked, and there stood her stepmother, Miranda Whitmore, looking thinner, sharper and colder than ever, with that same lipstick smile that never reached her eyes. And behind her, Sarah spotted the family. Lawyer, 2 cousins she didn't recognize, and someone who looked far too much like Emily to be real. "We weren't expecting you," Miranda said, already pretending this was a social call and not the legal bomb Sarah had just thrown into their perfectly rehearsed lie. But Sarah didn't blink, didn't flinch, just handed her the letter, and walked inside uninvited and unafraid, because she already knew what they were hiding, and this time she didn't plan to run from it. She planned to burn every lie down to the bones. The Whitmore estate looked smaller now, not physically but emotionally, like the walls had shrunk in guilt and time, no longer the palace it had once been in her terrified 14-year-old mind. And as Sarah stepped inside, it felt like walking back into a crime scene where all the blood had been scrubbed clean, but the scent of silence still clung to the walls, thick like old wallpaper that refused to peel. Miranda's voice followed her, brittle and clipped, offering politeness like a poisoned appetizer. "You've grown. We didn't think you'd respond to the letter." But Sarah didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge the fake warmth, because she knew what this was, damage control. And the moment she handed over Emily's letter to the probate lawyer in the sunroom, everything shifted, like the floor dipped an inch, and no one wanted to admit it. Mr. Ellison, the estate attorney, looked nervous, too nervous for someone who'd supposedly been working with the Whitmores for over 2 decades, and when Sarah asked, "Why was I named?" he hesitated before replying. Miss Emily had instructed a second will be stored with her personal effects. It was never filed due to circumstances. And just like that, the room turned to ice, because the only people who knew about Emily's personal effects were Sarah and Emily themselves. And whatever Sarah had just triggered wasn't a family gathering, it was a cover-up unraveling. The new will named Sarah not just as a beneficiary, but as Emily's legal successor to the Whitmore Trust, a title that came with 48% of the family holdings, partial control of 2 trust funds, and decision-making power over the family's legacy foundation. But most importantly, it included a clause titled "In case of my death," where Emily detailed a sequence of events, people, and threats that traced a line from her final days all the way back to Miranda and a man named Charles Devlin, the Whitmore Foundation's shadow treasurer, who disappeared 3 months before Emily died and had long been rumored to be blackmailing the family. Sarah could feel their panic bubbling beneath the surface like static. Miranda stiffening, The lawyer tapping his pen too hard. The cousins shifting like they'd been dragged into something deeper than they'd been told, and she reveled in the discomfort. Because for the first time since she was cast out of this house with a garbage bag of her belongings and a psychiatric evaluation that was falsified by the family doctor, she was the one holding the matches. She left that day without raising her voice, without threats, without tears, just a USB drive in her pocket copied from Ellison's files when no one was watching. And inside that drive were 2 damning pieces. The original will, digitally signed, time-stamped, and a scanned page from Emily's handwritten journal labeled 7 days before. And when Sarah read it alone in her motel room later that night, her hands shook not from sadness but from fury, because Emily had written, "If anything happens to me, Miranda did it, she and Devlin. They made me rewrite the will. Said they'd ruin Sarah, said they'd fake her suicide too. I recorded everything. Check the old typewriter box. Crawl space, you know the one." And Sarah did know, because as children that crawl space was their hideaway, their secret place, where Emily once stored her drawings and Sarah hid her favorite bracelet after Miranda broke it in half during one of her discipline sessions, and the next morning, Sarah returned, calm and dressed in black, wearing Emily's locket like armor. And while Miranda was in a meeting with the board, she slipped through the house unnoticed, pulled up the floorboard, and opened the typewriter box, and inside, beneath layers of forgotten dust, were 2 tapes labeled Truth and Proof. A small brown envelope with a photo of Devlin and Miranda exchanging a folder of cash, and a 3rd cassette with no label, just a date 3 days before Emily's overdose, and the second Sarah played it, her chest constricted. It was Emily whispering into the recorder, "If you're hearing this, they got to me. Sarah, don't trust the family. Don't trust the lawyers. Find Devlin's ledger. Burn the estate down if you have to. You were always stronger than me. Finish what I couldn't." And in that moment, everything inside Sarah that had stayed calm, strategic, and controlled for 10 years shattered. Because this wasn't just about a forgotten sister, it was about a murdered one, and Sarah wasn't just going to reclaim her place in the family she never wanted, she was going to expose them to the world. And no amount of money, denial, or polished reputation would save them now. The next 48 hours became a silent storm as Sarah combed through every second of the tapes, every photo edge, every signature, her mind sharpening into something colder than grief, because this wasn't mourning anymore, it was strategy. And Emily hadn't just died whispering truth, she had died building a war plan, piece by piece, anticipating exactly how the family would respond if Sarah returned, knowing Miranda would weaponize sympathy, that the lawyers would feign confusion, that the cousins would watch with eyes full of questions but mouths stitched by inheritance promises, and Sarah, in her motel room filled with crime board sketches and string together names, started to understand that what her sister left behind wasn't closure, it was invitation, a blueprint of revenge disguised as final wishes. The tapes revealed more than abuse, they exposed financial fraud so extensive it reached international grant embezzlement, offshore laundering through the Whitmore Foundation, fake donors, shell charities, and a ghost ledger Emily had once traced to a storage unit rented under Devlin's real name, except Devlin had gone missing 2 weeks before Emily's death. And now, thanks to Emily's notes, Sarah knew why. She had tried to blackmail him back, threatened to release documents unless he told the truth, and when he refused, she planned to expose it herself. But the moment she said that out loud in the tape, Sarah knew what had sealed her fate. They said they'd take Sarah too. I think they already have. She's the reason I'm doing this. If I die, I need someone to survive, someone who won't flinch. And Sarah didn't flinch. She returned to Hollow Crest that night wearing black gloves and a hoodie, broke into the storage unit using Emily's hidden keys, and found it just like her sister promised, Devlin's ledger. 5 phones and 2 flash drives, one of which held voice recordings with distorted threats from Miranda, confirming everything, including the payments to silence the coroner, the altered death certificate, and the bribe to move Emily's overdose ruling through quickly. Sarah didn't sleep after that. Sleep was a luxury for people not rebuilding their sister's life from shattered fragments, and by dawn, she'd encrypted all evidence and sent copies to 3 locations, a private journalist she trusted from her old school, a pro bono legal team working with abused minors, and one to herself under a new identity in case she was disappeared next. At noon, she walked into the Whitmore Foundation's gala, uninvited, dressed in the same midnight blue velvet Emily wore the night she gave her final speech. And every head turned like ghosts remembered their sins. Miranda froze, the boardroom. Chatter died, and Sarah walked straight to the podium with a voice that did not shake, saying, 10 years ago, you buried my sister. You erased my name. Tonight, we unbury the truth. And before anyone could stop her, she played the first tape, Miranda threatening Devlin, Emily crying, admitting she was forced to rewrite the will, and when the room erupted, Sarah locked eyes with the board chairman and said, the rest goes to the FBI unless I get answers. Tonight. And though chaos followed, Sarah stayed calm, because Emily had warned her about this too. They will beg, they will gaslight, they will cry, but don't let them take your voice. And now Sarah had the voice of two sisters in her throat. And the Whitmores, for the first time in their silk-wrapped lives, didn't know what to do when the silence fought back. They didn't speak her name for 10 years, and now they couldn't say anything else. Sarah Whitmore became the center of every hushed conversation, news headline, and private legal meeting within 24 hours of the gala, because what she unleashed wasn't just a personal attack, it was the unsealing of a rot that ran through the Whitmore Foundation like poison in crystal glass. And for the first time, Miranda's practiced calm began to slip. She released a press statement claiming the recordings were doctored, that Sarah was emotionally disturbed, even that Emily struggled with mental instability, but it backfired, because the media had already received full, unedited versions from Sarah's encrypted drop, and once an investigative journalist ran a side-by-side of Emily's final interview from a year before her death with the audio tapes, the truth spoke for itself. Emily wasn't mentally unstable, she was scared, calculated, and desperate to protect the only family she trusted, Sarah. Meanwhile, Devlin's name began trending after a leaked financial document showed his offshore bank account spiking days before Emily's death. And then 3 days later, his body was found in a drained riverbank 2 states away, decomposed. A single bullet in the chest, ruled a suicide by local police until Sarah submitted the tapes and ledger to federal agents who reopened the case within hours, citing evidence tampering and foul play. And Miranda? She crumbled slowly. First her media team quit, then her foundation donors froze all pledges. And then an anonymous source, Sarah's fourth drop, revealed Miranda's forged university credentials and her long-suppressed court settlement from the 90s involving a minor, silencing her credibility entirely. Sarah watched all of this unfold from a rented apartment near the courthouse, drinking stale coffee and flipping through old photos of Emily, whispering, "It's happening, Em, you're winning." But even victory felt hollow, because every time a headline screamed, "Whitmore matriarch under fire," Sarah didn't feel satisfaction. She felt the absence, the shape of Emily beside her, and it pushed her harder, deeper into war. The FBI formally contacted Sarah to testify, and she didn't hesitate. She handed over everything. The letters, the recordings, the ledger, the journal entries, even the music box Emily once used to hide memory cards. And as Sarah sat in the federal building conference room, her voice strong, eyes dry, she told the truth. Not just for Emily, but for every version of herself that was gaslit into silence, every girl told to stay quiet or disappear. And then came the moment that shattered Miranda. Leave news footage caught her storming out of a foundation board meeting, screaming at Ellison, the same lawyer who once forged the fake will, and hours later she was arrested on federal fraud charges, obstruction of justice, and evidence suppression related to Emily Whitmore's death. It wasn't justice yet, it was the beginning of it, and Sarah knew, standing in front of that courthouse, camera flashes in her face, that the real trial wouldn't be held in silence. It would be in public, with the world watching. And this time, no one would be allowed to forget Emily Whitmore again. The trial hadn't even begun, and yet the fallout had already fractured the town hollow crest. Once a gated community of white fences and richer lies was now buzzing with camera vans, picketers outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "Justice for Emily and silence is not inheritance," while other supporters of Miranda, mostly those who benefited from her dirty charity money, spoke of witch hunts and vengeful daughters. Sarah, meanwhile, lived in a tension she hadn't felt since she was a child. Eyes on her constantly. Reporters shouting questions like, "Why now?" and "Are you after the money or the truth?" And even worse, messages from people she never met claiming to be old friends of Emily's or family advisors offering to settle the matter quietly, but Sarah ignored them all. Because her compass didn't point to comfort, it pointed to truth, and Emily had asked her to finish it. What Sarah didn't expect was the envelope she received in her temporary mailbox, no stamp, no return address, just her name written in shaky cursive, and inside, a birth certificate. At first, she thought it was a prank until she saw the column marked mother's name, which still read Margaret Whitmore. But under father's name, it didn't say Charles Whitmore, the man she believed was her. Father, it said redacted by Order 87F, guardianship transfer, court sealed. Confusion flooded her like a second betrayal, and attached to the certificate was a torn photo of a man she didn't recognize, holding a baby wrapped in a pale blue blanket, with a date scrawled on the back, March 1994, Mount Harper, Ohio not. Hollowcrest, not the Whitmore state, but a rural clinic 400 miles away. And Sarah's mind reeled because what Emily wrote in her journal now echoed differently. You're not a Whitmore by blood. That's why they feared you. And suddenly, Sarah realized her exile wasn't just about protecting the family name or silencing her after Emily's death. It was about erasing her very identity. The Whitmores hadn't just covered up a crime, they had constructed Sarah's entire childhood around a legal lie, a falsified fatherhood, and a stolen legacy that didn't belong to them. And in her next meeting with the prosecution team, Sarah presented the new document and the lead investigator looked up and said, "This changes everything. If your identity was forged under sealed guardianship, we're looking at federal level. Custodial fraud, possibly child trafficking through private guardianship orders." And just like that, the trial became a storm far bigger than the death of one girl or the greed of a family. It became a story about the system that let it happen, the name that gave the Whitmores power to play God with bloodlines and memory. And suddenly, Sarah wasn't just telling Emily's story, she was finally understanding her own. Late that night, she stood by her sister's grave, now restored with a marble headstone, and whispered, "You knew. You always knew. That's why you made them fear me." And the wind shifted like a quiet yes, and in that moment, Sarah no longer felt like a girl returning home, she felt like a truth none of them were ready for. And she didn't come for their forgiveness, she came to bury their legacy in truth. The first day of Miranda's federal trial opened like a storm front. Journalists packed the courthouse steps. Sarah walked in wearing her sister's pendant like armor, and Miranda, flanked by 3 attorneys and not a trace of her former elegance, looked more like a relic of a fallen empire than the iron matriarch who once decided who lived and who vanished in the Whitmore household. The charges were stacked: custodial fraud, conspiracy to falsify a will, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and negligent homicide. But what silenced the room wasn't the charges, it was the moment the prosecutor called Sarah Whitmore to the stand, and she took that seat not as a fragile orphan, not as the girl they once institutionalized for seeing too much, but as the woman who brought down the house brick by brick. Her voice didn't shake as she recounted how she found the tapes, how Emily warned her, how the storage unit held Devlin's ledger and voice recordings that detailed payments made to silence coroner reports, threaten Emily and ensure Sarah was removed from the family by sealing her birth records, a move Miranda defended by saying, "We did what was best for the child." But that lie cracked the courtroom in half when the prosecutor played the final audio. Miranda screaming at Emily, "If you don't shut her up, I will bury you both." And the jury collectively stiffened as if the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. But nothing prepared Sarah for the twist that came next, because just after court adjourned, a plain envelope was handed to her by a bailiff who claimed it was found in the court archives, marked for you. And inside was a letter, yellowed with age, dated 7 days before Sarah's 8th birthday, signed in cursive, "Love, Dad." But the name wasn't Charles Whitmore, it was Nathaniel Grant, a name that hadn't been spoken in her life ever, and the letter began, "If you're reading this, it means I failed to get you back. They took you under sealed orders. Your mother fought, but they silenced her. You were never supposed to grow up in that house." And Sarah's hands trembled as she read every word, her lungs tightening with grief she didn't know she still had, because here, buried in a courthouse box for 15 years, was the truth about who loved her, who tried to save her, and who was murdered for it, because attached to the letter was a final court document, Case 302X, Nathaniel Grant vs. Hollowcrest Guardianship Trust, marked closed, petitioner deceased, unnatural circumstances. No investigation ordered, and with that, Sarah didn't just hold another piece of the puzzle, she held motive, history, and proof that her entire life was stolen to preserve the Whitmore name. That night, she stood outside the estate that still bore the Whitmore crest, stared at the front gate, and whispered, "You didn't just kill my sister. You killed my father, and now I'm done playing." And the next morning, she walked into the courtroom with the new files, handed them to the judge, and requested that the case be expanded to include wrongful guardianship, homicide conspiracy, and posthumous civil restitution. And when Miranda saw what she held, her eyes widened not with rage but fear, because for the first time, Sarah wasn't just the girl they erased. She was the heir to everything they tried to bury. By the time court resumed, Sarah Whitmore was no longer just a local headline. Her name had become a movement, a reckoning, a living question mark carried by every woman who had been silenced, erased, or buried in the name of power. National media outlets aired specials titled "The Sister Who Fought Back" and "Legacy on Trial, The Whitmore Scandal." And online, Sarah's testimony had gone viral, not just for its poise, but for the chilling contrast it painted: one sister dead, one nearly erased, both silenced by the same matriarch now clinging to a crumbling empire of lies. The moment Sarah walked into court that morning, reporters shouted her name like she was a fallen princess reclaiming a throne. But she didn't wave, didn't speak. She carried with her a sealed folder marked Grant v. Hollow Crest Trust and her father's final letter, which would now be submitted into evidence. The judge permitted it with only one question: "Do you believe this directly relates to the motive in your sister's death?" And Sarah answered without pause, "Yes. They silenced her because she wouldn't let them erase me." And in the front row, Miranda flinched like someone had thrown acid instead of words. The courtroom's energy changed when the judge ruled that Miranda Whitmore, under federal indictment, would be compelled to testify live, under oath, and the nation watched as a woman who once held charity galas with politicians and royalty now sat with her hair flat, her hands trembling, and her jaw clenched so tightly the microphone caught her teeth, grinding when the prosecutor asked, "Did you falsify legal guardianship to gain control of Nathaniel Grant's daughter?" And silence, then the shaking head, then the classic defense: "I was trying to protect the family." She would have ruined everything. But when shown the document proving Nathaniel's case was closed without investigation after his sudden death, Miranda cracked, not loudly but with a single, breathless sentence: "He knew too much." Emily wanted to tell her. She had to be stopped. And the courtroom fell so still the judge had to remind the audience not to react. But it was too late. What had once been whispers was now confirmed in Miranda's own voice. She orchestrated Sarah's erasure, threatened Emily into silence, and suppressed evidence of 2 deaths in the name of preserving a false legacy. The prosecution rested that day with one final statement: "Your Honor, the defendant didn't just commit fraud, she redesigned a bloodline, and she killed to protect it." And as Miranda was escorted out of the courtroom, cameras flashing, Sarah didn't follow her with her eyes. She turned to the jury, to the crowd, to the world, and simply said, "Emily was worth more than silence. And so was I." And that night, as the internet burned with support, as influencers and survivors spoke out in solidarity, and as her sister's grave was adorned with candles and letters from strangers saying, "You're not forgotten," Sarah sat in the quiet and wrote a name in her notebook for the first time: Sarah Grant, not Whitmore, not ward of the estate. Just herself reborn through fire and truth. The courtroom buzzed like a waiting heartbeat the day the verdict was due. Camera crews packed the lawn. Microphones lined the courthouse steps, and across the world, people who had never heard of Hollow Crest, the Whitmores, or a girl named Sarah were now watching, holding their breath to see if justice would finally outrun money, manipulation, and murder. Sarah arrived quietly, dressed in black, not mourning but honoring her sister's necklace around her neck, her father's letter in her hand, and a silent promise written across her heart: no more silence. When the jury filed in, time seemed to stop, and the 4-person, voice steady but eyes wide, delivered the words Sarah had waited a lifetime to hear: "We find the defendant, Miranda Whitmore, guilty on all counts." And like a pressure valve released after years of being clamped shut, the courtroom exhaled, and Sarah closed her eyes, not in celebration but in relief, because the truth had finally broken through, and the people who buried it were no longer untouchable. Miranda's sentencing followed quickly: 35 years without parole, federal seizure of all assets tied to fraudulent accounts, and the immediate dissolution of the Whitmore Foundation with control of all legal holdings transferred, not to the next in line by blood, but to the only surviving person named in Emily's final will: Sarah. She didn't speak to reporters, didn't give a victory interview. She went straight to the graveyard, where Emily lay in a plot that finally bore her full name, her real date of death, and the words Sarah had personally etched into stone. She died for truth, so I could live in it. And standing there, surrounded by wind, old trees, and new peace, Sarah whispered, "I finished it, Em. You can rest now." And yet, as she turned to leave, she knew it wasn't over. The town had changed forever, foundations dismantled, money lost, reputations destroyed, and offers flooded in. Publishers wanting her memoir, Hollywood asking for the rights, nonprofits begging her to leave them, but Sarah said no to all of it. Because the moment Miranda was sentenced, she realized the story didn't belong to anyone but her and Emily. So she moved quietly, privately, to a place no one expected, the same town where her real father had tried to raise her before they tore him away. And she bought a little house, opened a library in his name, and hung a single frame note above her writing desk. They didn't erase you. They made you unforgettable. And every day after that, Sarah Grant, no longer a ghost, no longer a weapon, no longer a lie, woke up in a life that was finally hers, built not on revenge, but truth. And when people asked her if she missed the Whitmores, the courtrooms, the chaos, she only ever said one thing: "I miss Emily, but I kept my promise." And that's enough.